What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Actually Good Coffee Podcast, the show where we talk about all things coffee related, all while drinking a cup of coffee. Vietnam is experiencing flooding during the start of their harvest season, and I, like a fool, thought the price of coffee was going to continue to drop after it did at about 7% on Monday, which is unheard of for the commodity price of coffee. Yeah, coffee prices are going back up in the lower 300 range. I thought they were going to come back down. It seems like it's not happening, but we'll see. We still have a lot of time to see what happens. I was actually going to dedicate this episode to a bar chart post on some of the factors that are affecting the price of coffee right now, but I was actually boring myself reading about it, and I'm not hip with the commodity trader lingo, so we're gonna have to wait until I get a better understanding of just what these people are talking about, because to be perfectly honest with you, I was lost. So today I'm actually going to talk about moderate daily caffeine intake during pregnancy. Specifically, should you drink coffee while pregnant? The reason I want to talk about it is because my wife is actually 7 months pregnant. This seems like a pretty obvious answer to most people, but it seems like nobody actually really knows why. So I, for one, wanted to look into this topic since I'm going and dealing with it on a first-hand experience. My wife used to love coffee before she was pregnant, and now she limits her intake to about 1 cup a day. This is a study posted by the National Institute of Health, posted in 2021. So this is a fairly recent study. You can find this online. You can read this yourself. I'm going to link this in the description as well, and I'm just going to go through a little bit. But if you don't want to read it, I'm about to go through it all with all of you. So, pregnant women who consume the caffeine equivalent of as little as half a cup of coffee a day on average had slightly smaller babies than pregnant women who did not consume caffeinated beverages. According to a study by researchers at the National Institutes of Health, the researchers found corresponding reductions in size and lean body mass for infants whose mothers consumed below the 200 milligram of caffeine per day, which is about 2 cups of coffee, believed to increase the risk to the fetus. Smaller birth size can place infants at a higher risk of obesity, heart disease, and diabetes later in life. Wow, that's pretty intense. The researchers were led by Catherine L. Grants of the Division of Intramural Population Health Research at NIH's Eunice Kennedy Shriver National Institute of Health, Child, and Human Development. She states, until we learn more, our results suggest it might be prudent to limit or forego caffeine-containing beverages during pregnancy, Dr. Grant said. Previous studies have linked high caffeine consumption, so more than 200 milligrams a day, during pregnancy to infants being small for their gestational age, or at risk of intrauterine growth restriction, meaning that's being in the lowest 10th percentile for infants of the same gestational age. However, studies on moderate daily caffeine consumption, so 200 milligrams or less, during pregnancy have produced mixed results. Some have found similar elevated risks for low birth weight and other poor birth outcomes, while others have found no such links. The current study authors noted that many of the earlier studies did not account for other factors that could influence infant birth size, such as variation in caffeine content and maternal smoking during pregnancy. For their study, the authors analyzed data on more than 2,000 racially and ethnically diverse women at 12 clinical sites who were enrolled from 8 to 13 weeks of pregnancy. The women were non-smokers and did not have any health problems before pregnancy. From weeks 10 to 13 of pregnancy, the woman provided a blood sample that was later analyzed for caffeine and paraxanthine, a compound produced when caffeine is broken down in the body. The women also reported their daily consumption of caffeinated beverages for the past week, once when they enrolled and periodically throughout their pregnancies. Compared to infants born to women with no or minimal blood levels of caffeine, infants born to women who had the highest blood levels of caffeine at enrollment were at an average of 84 grams lighter at birth. It's about 3 ounces. They were 0.44 centimeters shorter and had a head circumference of 0.28 centimeters smaller. Based on the women's own estimates estimates of beverages they drank, women who consumed about 50 milligrams of caffeine a day, which is about half a cup of coffee, had infants 66 grams lighter, which is about 2.3 ounces, and 0.32 centimeters smaller. The researchers noted that caffeine is believed to cause blood vessels in the uterus and placenta to constrict, which could reduce the blood supply to the fetus and inhibit growth. Similarly, researchers believe that caffeine could potentially disrupt fetal stress hormones, putting infants at risk for rapid weight gain after birth and for later life obesity, heart disease, and diabetes. The authors concluded that their findings suggest that even moderate caffeine consumption may be associated with decreased growth of the fetus. So that's a pretty big assumption. I think you also need to pay attention to the language that they're using here. They say researchers believe caffeine could potentially disrupt fetal stress hormones, putting infants at risk for rapid weight gain after birth. That's a large assumption. I'm not going to assume what kind of strategies they use to find this research, but I think that's just the more of the negatives that are around this idea of caffeine intake while pregnant. That was a study done in March of 2021. I also have another study from Penn Medicine, which was completed in November of 2021. Researchers studied prospective data from 2,500 pregnant participants who were enrolled in the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. At enrollment and at each office visit thereafter, women reported their weekly intake of caffeinated coffee, caffeinated tea, soda, and energy drinks. Concentrations of caffeine were also measured in the participants' plasma at 10 to 13 weeks into their pregnancies. The researchers then matched their caffeine consumption with primary outcomes, clinical diagnoses of gestational diabetes, gestational hypertension, and preeclampsia. And what they found was that drinking up to 100 milligrams of caffeine per day was associated with a 47% reduction in diabetes risk. This is for the mother. There were no statistically significant differences in blood pressure, preeclampsia, or hypertension between those who did and did not drink caffeine during pregnancy. The researchers note that the findings are consistent with studies that caffeine has been associated with improved energy balance and decreased fat mass. They also say that they cannot rule out that these findings are due to other constituents of coffee and tea, such as phytochemicals, which may impact inflammation and insulin resistance, leading to a lower risk for gestational diabetes. However, past studies from the same group have shown that caffeine consumption during pregnancy, even in amounts less than 200 milligrams per day, were associated with smaller neonatal anthropometric measurements, according to Hinkle. She said, "It would not be advised for women who are non-drinkers to initiate caffeinated beverage consumption for the purpose of lowering gestational diabetes risk. But our findings may provide some reassurance to women who already are consuming low to moderate levels of caffeine that such consumption likely will not increase their maternal health risks." So what's my opinion on this? Listen, I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly what's going on in both of these studies. I'm just trying to provide you with the information. But I would say that the health of the mother is absolutely going to have a very important impact on the health of the fetus itself. I think that if you are already drinking coffee, like this one study says, keeping your intake moderate will be okay. I can tell you that firsthand. My wife has definitely decreased her caffeine consumption, and in every single ultrasound that we've gotten, our baby is the right size that the doctors want them to be. I think it's actually even a little bit larger than their standard. And I would also say that I'm curious to see whether they actually take into account what else they were putting in their coffee, if it wasn't just black coffee that they were drinking. Especially when we're talking about preeclampsia and diabetes, that's absolutely going to have an effect on their percentage of getting that diagnosis while pregnant. And a lot of studies that I have read in the past that involve coffee, it's very few that have actually taken that measurement into consideration in regards to measuring what sort of additives they're putting into their coffee. That's definitely going to have an impact. Maybe there's some blurred lines that are getting mixed between those two measurements that go on in these studies of coffee. So just something to take into consideration. I would say that you're just going to have to consult your doctor, find out if it's right for you, how you should change your habits, how it's affecting your pregnancy, especially with how little information there is on caffeine intake under 200 milligrams. I would say keeping it under that level is going to be relatively safe for you. But like I said, I'll actually leave a link to both studies within the description so that you can read these for yourself. Thank you guys for listening, and I will talk to you all again very soon.